The massive space station known as Galactic Unity Academy hung in the void like a gleaming jewel among the stars. Inside its curved corridors, hundreds of young beings from dozens of different worlds hurried between classes, their voices creating a symphony of alien languages and universal translator hums. Among them walked a small figure who seemed to float rather than step. Kira belonged to the Villani, a species that had only recently joined the galactic community. Her people were known throughout the galaxy for their incredible minds and their delicate, almost ethereal appearance. She stood barely 5 feet tall, with skin that seemed to glow with a soft inner light and translucent wings that folded against her back like living crystal. This was her first day at the most prestigious school in known space and she was terrified. Kira clutched her data pad against her chest as she navigated the bustling hallways. Every few steps, she had to press herself against the wall as larger students thundered past. The Corvin students moved in packs, their thick blue hides gleaming under the artificial lights. The tall, graceful Zephyrians glided overhead on natural air currents, their feathered arms spread wide. Even the humanoid species seemed giant compared to her fragile frame. She checked her schedule again, squinting at the alien script that her translator rendered into readable text. Advanced quantum physics was her next class, located in Section 7. The problem was finding Section 7 in this maze of identical corridors that seemed designed for beings twice her size. Lost already? The voice rumbled behind her like distant thunder. Kira spun around to find herself face to face with 3 massive students. They belonged to the thorax species, reptilian beings that averaged 8 feet in height and possessed strength that could crush steel. Their scaled hides were a deep green that seemed to absorb light, and their yellow eyes held a predatory gleam that made her wings tremble involuntarily. The largest of the 3, whose name tag read Grix, looked down at her with obvious amusement. His companions flanked him on either side, their expressions mirroring their leader's cruel entertainment. "I said, are you lost?" Grix repeated, stepping closer. The movement forced Kira to crane her neck to maintain eye contact, a gesture that seemed to amuse him even more. "No, I'm fine," Kira whispered, her voice barely audible above the general noise of the corridor. "I'm just looking for Section 7. "Section 7? One of Grix's friends laughed, the sound like rocks grinding together. "That's clear across the station. A little thing like you will never make it in time." Other students had begun to slow their pace, sensing drama unfolding. Kira noticed that none of them looked concerned for her welfare. Instead, they watched with the detached interest of spectators at an entertainment venue. This was clearly not the first time they had witnessed such a scene. "Maybe we should help her," Grix suggested with mock kindness. "After all, we wouldn't want the Academy's newest student to get lost on her first day." Without warning, he reached out and plucked the data pad from her hands. Kira gasped and reached for it, but Grix simply held it high above his head, far beyond her reach. "Let's see what classes the little bug is taking," he announced to his friends. "Advanced quantum physics, stellar engineering, galactic history." He paused, his expression shifting to one of exaggerated surprise. My. Someone thinks very highly of themselves. "Please give it back," Kira pleaded, her wings fluttering with distress. "I need it to find my classes." "Oh, you need it?" Grix's tone remained falsely sympathetic. "Well, why didn't you say so?" He tossed the data pad to one of his companions who caught it easily. "Catch," the thorax called out, throwing it to the 3rd member of their group. Kira darted between them, trying desperately to intercept her property, but she might as well have been trying to catch the wind. The 3 giants continued their game of keep away while she stumbled and grasped uselessly at the air. The watching students began to murmur among themselves. A few seemed uncomfortable with the display, but most simply observed with the same detached interest they might show for any other form of entertainment. Some even seemed to approve, as if watching a smaller species being humiliated confirmed their own place in the complex social hierarchy of the Academy. "You know what I think?" Grix mused, finally catching the data pad and holding it just out of Kira's reach. "I think someone made a mistake. I think the admissions board confused intelligence with belonging." He leaned down until his massive head was level with hers, his breath hot against her face. "This academy is for strong species, little bug. For beings who can handle the pressures of real education. Not for delicate little flowers who might break at the first sign of difficulty." Kira's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to let them fall. She had worked her entire life for this opportunity. Her test scores had been the highest in her planet's history. She had earned her place here through merit, not charity. "I belong here," she said quietly, though her voice shook with emotion. Grix straightened up, his laugh booming through the corridor. We'll see about that, little bug. We'll see how long you last when you realize what real academic pressure feels like. He tossed her data pad onto the floor, where it clattered against the metal surface. Without another word, he and his companions walked away, their heavy footsteps echoing through the hall. Kira knelt to retrieve her device, her hands shaking as she checked for damage. The screen flickered but still functioned. As she stood up, she became aware that the other students were dispersing, the entertainment over. None offered to help or even acknowledged what had happened. She was alone in a corridor full of beings, more isolated than she had ever felt in her life. 3 weeks had passed since Kira's humiliating first day, and the pattern had only gotten worse. Every morning brought new torments from Grix and his gang. They would knock her books from her hands, block her path to classes, and make loud comments about her appearance whenever she passed. The other students had learned to look away, treating her suffering as an unfortunate but acceptable part of academy life. Today felt different though. Word had spread through the corridors that another new student was arriving, and this one was creating quite a buzz among the faculty and student body alike. The transport shuttle docked at the academy's main bay with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. From its depths stepped a figure that immediately caught everyone's attention, not because he was impressive, but because he was so utterly ordinary. Mark Thompson looked around the docking bay with curious eyes, taking in the sight of dozens of alien species going about their daily routines. He stood about average height for his kind, with brown hair that stuck up in several directions and clothes that seemed oddly casual compared to the formal uniforms worn by most other species. "Another primitive arrival," whispered a tall crystalline student to her companion, her voice creating tiny musical chimes. "I heard their planet only achieved space travel a few decades ago." "Look at how it walks," observed a Corvin student with obvious disdain. "No grace, no awareness of proper social hierarchy. These humans are clearly not ready for civilized society." Mark either didn't hear the comments or chose to ignore them. He shouldered his simple bag and followed the signs toward the registration office, his expression one of genuine excitement rather than nervousness. Unlike most new arrivals, he seemed completely unbothered by the stares and whispers that followed him through the corridors. The registration process took most of the morning. Mark's academic records were impressive, though his species was largely unknown to the galactic educational community. His test scores were solid, and his psychological evaluation showed remarkable stability and adaptability. Still, many of the faculty members wondered if admitting humans had been a wise decision. By lunchtime, Mark had received his room assignment and class schedule. He made his way to the massive cafeteria, where hundreds of students from dozens of worlds gathered to eat and socialize. The room was a marvel of engineering, with different atmospheric zones to accommodate species with varying breathing requirements and temperature preferences. Mark grabbed a tray of food that looked somewhat familiar and began searching for a place to sit. The cafeteria's social structure became immediately obvious to him. The larger, more aggressive species occupied the central tables, while smaller and more peaceful beings clustered around the edges. It reminded him of every school cafeteria he had ever seen, just with more tentacles and scales. He found an empty table near the edge of the room and sat down, perfectly content to eat alone while observing this fascinating display of interspecies social dynamics. As he ate, he noticed patterns emerging. Certain species clearly dominated others through size and intimidation. Others seemed to have earned respect through technological advancement or economic power. And some, like the small winged being he noticed in the corner, appeared to have no social standing at all. The winged girl sat by herself at a table clearly meant for larger beings, her feet dangling several inches off the floor. She ate quickly, her large eyes constantly scanning the room as if expecting trouble. Mark watched as she carefully avoided looking toward the central tables where the massive reptilian students held court. That's when the trouble started. Grix rose from his table with theatrical slowness, his yellow eyes fixed on the small Villani girl. His two companions followed, and Mark could see other students beginning to pay attention to the unfolding drama. "Well, well," Grix announced loudly enough for half the cafeteria to hear. "Look what we have here. The little bug thinks she deserves to eat at the same time as real students." Kira's wings folded tighter against her back, but she continued eating, trying desperately to ignore the approaching threat. Mark found himself leaning forward, his casual interest shifting to focused attention. "I'm talking to you, bug," Grix continued, now standing directly behind Kira's chair. "It's rude to ignore your betters when they're speaking to you." The cafeteria had grown quieter, though conversations continued at other tables. This was clearly a regular occurrence that most students had learned to tune out. Mark, however, found himself unable to look away. Grix reached out with one massive hand and deliberately knocked Kira's tray off the table. Food scattered across the floor in a colorful mess, and the sound of the metal tray clattering against the deck echoed through the room. "Oops," Grix said with exaggerated innocence. "How clumsy of me. I suppose someone should clean that up." Kira stared at her ruined meal, her shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. Around the cafeteria, students watched with varying degrees of discomfort and amusement, but none moved to help or intervene. "Well?" Grix demanded. "Are you going to clean up this mess, or do I need to teach you proper manners?" That's when something stirred deep in Mark's chest. It was an old feeling, one that had driven his species through countless generations of standing up to bullies, protecting the weak, and refusing to back down from fights they couldn't win. His ancestors had faced down predators twice their size with nothing but pointed sticks and stubborn determination. Mark stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly quiet cafeteria. He looked around for something to set down, finally settling on his drink container. "Hold my juice," he said to no one in particular, his voice carrying clearly through the silence. Every eye in the cafeteria turned toward him, confusion rippling through the alien students who had no idea what the strange phrase meant or why this unremarkable human was standing up. The entire cafeteria fell silent as Mark walked across the room toward the thorax table. His footsteps echoed against the metal floor, each one seeming louder than the last. Hundreds of alien eyes tracked his movement, confusion and curiosity rippling through the crowd like waves. Mark moved with the easy confidence of someone who had never learned to be impressed by size or threats. He had grown up in a rough neighborhood on Earth, where backing down from bullies only made things worse. The fact that these bullies happened to be 8-foot-tall reptilian aliens from another planet didn't change the basic equation in his mind. "Excuse me," Mark said politely as he approached Grix, who was still standing over Kira's scattered food. "I think there's been a misunderstanding here." Grix turned slowly, his yellow eyes narrowing as they fixed on this unexpected interruption. Up close, the size difference was even more dramatic. The thorax towered over Mark by nearly 3 feet, his scaled hide gleaming under the artificial lights like living armor. "This doesn't concern you, human," Grix rumbled, his voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. "Your species has no standing here. Go back to your table before you embarrass yourself." Mark nodded thoughtfully as if seriously considering the advice. "You know, you're probably right about the standing part. We humans are pretty new to this whole galactic community thing." He glanced down at the scattered food on the floor, then back up at Grix. "But we do have this weird habit back home." "What habit?" Grix demanded, growing irritated with this strange human who didn't seem properly intimidated. "We don't like watching big guys pick on little guys," Mark said simply. "It's kind of a thing with us." A ripple of nervous laughter went through some of the watching students. The idea that this ordinary-looking human might challenge the Academy's most notorious bullies seemed absurd. Grix's companions moved to flank their leader, confident that their combined presence would end this foolish display quickly. "You think you can stop me?" Grix asked, leaning down to bring his massive face closer to Mark's. His breath was hot and carried the scent of something that reminded Mark unpleasantly of sulfur. "I could break you in half without effort." Mark didn't flinch or step back. Instead, he looked thoughtfully up at the towering alien, as if trying to solve an interesting puzzle. "Maybe," he admitted. "You're definitely bigger than me. Stronger too, I guess." Grix straightened up, satisfaction evident in his posture. This human was finally showing proper respect for the natural order. "But here's the thing," Mark continued conversationally. "Where I come from, size isn't everything. We had to deal with things bigger and meaner than us for millions of years. Saber-toothed tigers, cave bears, other humans who thought might made right." He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "We got pretty good at evening the odds." Before anyone could react, Mark moved. He didn't charge forward like the thorax expected. Instead, he dropped low and swept his leg out, catching Grix behind the knees. The massive alien's legs buckled, and he crashed to the floor with a sound like a falling tree. The cafeteria erupted in gasps and shouts of surprise. This wasn't how fights were supposed to go. The bigger, stronger species was supposed to win through sheer physical dominance. Nobody had expected the small human to actually knock down the Academy's most feared bully. Grix roared in rage and tried to grab Mark, but the human was already moving. He rolled between the fallen thorax legs and popped up behind him, staying mobile and never giving his opponent a clear target. One of Grix's friends lunged forward, trying to grab Mark in a bear hug that would have crushed most opponents. Mark ducked under the grasping arms and used his momentum to drive his shoulder into the alien's midsection. The impact sent the second thorax stumbling backward into a table, scattering trays and sending other students scrambling for safety. The third member of the group tried a different approach, reaching for a fallen cafeteria tray to use as a weapon. Mark spotted the move and kicked the tray away, then grabbed the alien's wrist and used a simple leverage technique to send him tumbling over a nearby chair. Throughout the brief but intense fight, Mark never stopped moving. He didn't try to match strength with strength or stand toe-to-toe with opponents who outweighed him by hundreds of pounds. Instead, he used speed, timing, and tactics that his opponents had never encountered before. Within minutes, all three thorax were on the ground, groaning and trying to figure out what had happened. Mark stood over them, barely breathing hard, holding a cafeteria tray like a shield. His hair was messed up and his shirt was torn, but he looked completely calm. The entire cafeteria stared in stunned silence. Faculty members who had come running at the sound of fighting stopped in their tracks, unsure how to process what they were seeing. "Now then," Mark said pleasantly, looking down at the three bullies. "I believe you made a mess that needs cleaning up." Grix struggled to his feet, his pride wounded more than his body. You fight without honor?" he sputtered. "No rules, no proper form." Mark shrugged. "Where I come from, there's only one rule in a fight." He gestured toward Kira, who was still sitting frozen at her table. "Don't pick on people who can't fight back." He pointed at the scattered food on the floor. "Clean it up. All of it. And then you're going to apologize to her." "Never," Grix snarled, though he made no move to attack again. Mark's expression hardened slightly. "Then we can do this the hard way instead. Your choice." The sight of three massive thorax kneeling on the cafeteria floor, carefully picking up scattered food while a human half their size watched over them, created a buzz that spread through the academy like wildfire. Students pulled out their communication devices, recording the unprecedented scene and sharing it across the station's networks. Grix moved slowly, his yellow eyes burning with humiliation as he gathered pieces of Kira's ruined meal. His massive hands, designed for crushing and tearing, struggled with the delicate task of cleaning up small crumbs and sauce stains. The other two thorax worked alongside him, their heads hung low in shame. "I'm sorry," Grix finally muttered, the words barely audible. "Louder," Mark said calmly, still holding the cafeteria tray. "And look at her when you say it." Grix raised his head and met Kira's wide eyes. "I am sorry for my behavior," he said, each word seeming to cause him physical pain. "It was wrong to treat you this way." Kira sat frozen in her chair, unable to process what was happening. In the 3 weeks since her arrival, no one had ever stood up for her. No one had ever challenged the Academy's unspoken rule that the strong could do whatever they wanted to the weak. Mark nodded approvingly. "Good. Now, I want you three to remember something." He leaned forward slightly, his voice taking on an edge that made even the watching students uncomfortable. "If I hear about anyone bothering Kira again, we're going to have another conversation. And next time, I might not be in such a good mood." The three thorax gathered the last of the mess and hurried away from the scene, their dignity in ruins. The cafeteria slowly returned to normal, though conversations buzzed with excitement and confusion about what they had witnessed. Within hours, the incident had become the most talked-about event in Academy history. Video recordings circulated through every dormitory and classroom. Students who had missed the original confrontation watched in amazement as this unremarkable human dismantled three of the Academy's most feared bullies without breaking a sweat. By evening, the communications were reaching beyond the Academy walls. Parents across the galaxy began receiving messages from their children about the strange events at school. The reaction was immediate and intense. The Thorac Council, a governing body representing their species across multiple star systems, issued a formal complaint within 12 hours. They demanded Mark's immediate expulsion and threatened to withdraw all Thorax students from the Academy if their grievances weren't addressed. "This human attacked our children without provocation," declared Council Speaker Morgoth in a statement broadcast across official channels. "This barbaric behavior cannot be tolerated in a civilized educational environment." Similar complaints began pouring in from other species whose children attended the Academy. Many expressed concern about allowing humans into their educational institutions if this was an example of their typical behavior. Principal Vex found herself dealing with the biggest crisis in her long career. Her office became a constant stream of angry parents, concerned faculty members, and diplomatic representatives demanding answers. The situation was spiraling beyond a simple schoolyard fight into a potential diplomatic incident. Mark, meanwhile, found himself summoned to the principal's office early the next morning. He walked through corridors where conversation stopped as he passed. Some students looked at him with admiration, others with fear, and many with simple curiosity about this human who had turned their world upside down. Principal Vex's office was a testament to galactic diversity, with furniture and decorations from dozens of different worlds. The principal herself was a member of the counselor species, with multiple eye stalks that could focus independently on different objects. Right now they were all focused on Mark. "Mr. Thompson," she began, her translator rendering her clicking sounds into standard galactic speech. "Do you understand the seriousness of what you've done?" Mark sat quietly in the chair across from her desk, his hands folded in his lap. "Yes, ma'am. I stopped some bullies from picking on a smaller student." "You assaulted 3 students," Principal Vex corrected sternly. "Students from families with significant political and economic influence in the galactic community. They were making her eat off the floor," Mark replied simply. "Where I come from, that's not acceptable behavior." Principal Vex's eye stalks swiveled in what Mark was beginning to recognize as a sign of frustration. "Where you come from is not relevant here. This academy operates under galactic law and custom. What you call bullying, others might consider normal social interaction between species of different capabilities." Mark's expression hardened slightly. "So it's normal for big kids to humiliate small kids just because they can?" "It's not that simple," Principal Vex began, but Mark interrupted her. "It is that simple," he said quietly. "Either it's okay to hurt people weaker than you or it's not. There's no middle ground." Before Principal Vex could respond, her office door chimed. Her assistant's voice came through the communication system, sounding flustered. "Principal Vex, there are several students here who insist on speaking with you about the incident yesterday. They say it's urgent." Principal Vex sighed, her eye stalks drooping with exhaustion. "Send them in." The door opened to reveal Kira, still looking nervous but with a determination in her large eyes that hadn't been there before. Behind her came a small group of other students, all from the Academy's smaller and traditionally oppressed species. "Principal Vex," Kira said, her voice stronger than Mark had ever heard it. "We need to tell you what's really been happening at this school." The group of small species students filed into Principal Vex's office, their nervous energy filling the room. Mark watched from his chair as they arranged themselves in a semicircle, with Kira stepping forward as their spokesperson. Her translucent wings caught the light from the office windows, creating tiny rainbows that danced across the walls. "Principal Vex," Kira began, her voice trembling but determined, "what happened yesterday in the cafeteria wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the worst time." Principal Vex's eye stalks focused entirely on the small Villani girl. "What do you mean?" Behind Kira, a young student from the Whisper species stepped forward. His people were known for their soft voices and peaceful nature, making them frequent targets for more aggressive species. "They make us do their homework," he said quietly. "The Thorax and their friends. If we refuse, they break our things or lock us out of our dormitory rooms." Another student, this one from the Crystalline Shard people, added her voice to the growing chorus of complaints. "They take our meal credits and make us go hungry. They say it's because we don't need as much food as real students." One by one the stories poured out. Years of systematic bullying that had been dismissed by faculty as cultural differences or normal social interaction between species. Students forced to do menial tasks for their tormentors. Academic work stolen and claimed by stronger species. Physical intimidation that left psychological scars lasting for months. Mark listened in growing anger as the pattern became clear. The Academy's administration had turned a blind eye to widespread abuse, hiding behind the excuse that different species had different social norms. What they had really done was create a system where might made right, and the strongest students could terrorize the weakest without consequence. "Why haven't you reported this before?" Principal Vex asked, though her tone had shifted from stern disapproval to genuine concern. A small student from the Moth people answered, her voice barely above a whisper. "We tried. We were told that we needed to adapt to Academy life, that learning to deal with different personalities was part of our education." Kira nodded, her confidence growing as she saw the principal's reaction. "Yesterday was the first time anyone ever stood up for us. The first time someone said that what was happening to us was wrong." She turned to look at Mark, gratitude shining in her large eyes. "He didn't know me. He didn't know my species or our history or our capabilities. He just saw someone being hurt and decided to help." Principal Vex sat back in her chair, the weight of the situation settling over her like a heavy blanket. She had prided herself on running a prestigious institution that brought together the best and brightest from across the galaxy. Instead, she had been overseeing a system of institutionalized bullying that had been hidden behind cultural sensitivity and political correctness. The office door chimed again, and her assistant announced the arrival of Dr. Sarah Chin, the human cultural attaché who had been sent to handle the diplomatic fallout from Mark's actions. Dr. Chin entered the room with the calm professionalism of someone accustomed to navigating complex interspecies politics. "Principal Vex," Dr. Chin said, nodding respectfully to the various students in the room. "I've been reviewing the complaints filed against Mr. Thompson, and I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about human behavior and values." She moved to stand beside Mark's chair, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. "Humans are what we call pack animals. We evolved as social creatures who protected their communities from external threats." When Mark saw Kira being bullied, his response wasn't aggression for its own sake. It was the protective instinct of someone defending a member of his pack. Principal Vex's eye stalks swiveled between Dr. Chin and the group of students. "But the violence he used was controlled and proportional," Dr. Chin interrupted gently. "Mark could have seriously injured those students if he had wanted to. Instead, he used just enough force to stop the immediate threat and establish boundaries. That's not the action of a violent species. That's the action of a species that understands justice and protection of the innocent." Over the following days, the Academy underwent a transformation that nobody could have predicted. The stories told by Kira and the other students sparked a comprehensive investigation into the school's culture and policies. What the investigators found was a systematic pattern of abuse that had been ignored or dismissed for years. New rules were implemented immediately. Clear guidelines about bullying and harassment were established, with serious consequences for violations. Faculty members received training on recognizing and addressing intimidation between species. Most importantly, the Academy's culture began to shift from one that tolerated the dominance of the strong over the weak to one that protected all students regardless of their species' physical capabilities. Mark found himself at the center of these changes, though he tried to downplay his role. Students from smaller species sought him out in the hallways, thanking him for his courage. Even some members of the larger species approached him with respect, recognizing that his actions had forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about their behavior. The friendship between Mark and Kira grew stronger as the weeks passed. She helped him with advanced theoretical concepts that came naturally to her brilliant mind, while he made sure that no one bothered her or any of the other previously victimized students. More importantly, the other students began to find their own voices. Species that had accepted their place at the bottom of the social hierarchy started standing up for themselves and each other. The Academy's rigid power structure, built on physical dominance and intimidation, began to crumble as students realized that strength came in many forms. On the day that the new anti-bullying policies were officially announced, Kira found Mark in the library where he was struggling with a particularly difficult physics problem. "Thank you," she said simply, settling into the chair across from him. Mark looked up from his work, confused. "For what?" "For showing us that being small doesn't mean being helpless," she replied. "For proving that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand up for someone else." Mark smiled and returned to his homework. "Hold my pencil," he said with a grin. "I think I hear someone bothering a first-year student down the hall."